everyone, I'm Joshua,
I'm Ella.
and today we're going to present about the different philosophies of joy. So we're going to explore how different worldviews, like nihilism, essentialism, stoicism, affect how it defines our meaning of happiness and how it differs across different time periods. So why did we find this important? So me, in high school, I was really interested in these kind of things, right? How can somebody perceive so many negative emotions like nihilism and essentialism in a very positive way? So some thinkers who influenced why I want to do this is somebody like Albert Camus when he wrote The Stranger.
I was inspired to do this because a while ago I read Seneca's letters to Lucilius. I'm sorry, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but that's of like the Stoicism, and that really reshaped the way I personally thought about joy as like more of a sense of fulfillment and how we can control our emotions. And so that led me to wonder like how do different philosophical frameworks affect how people interpret situations and their sense of joy. And so it led me to ask how much of joy can be cultivated through mindset, through different philosophies or religions or worldviews, and how much of it depends on circumstance.
Yeah, I'd say similarly, I got into philosophy as well in high school. And kind of during that time, my conscious definition of joy or happiness was redefined. I feel like I was kind of curious as to how can we continue practice of different actions retrain our synapses to fire, not on subjects of joy that we knew before, but on things that we find joy in now.
In a sense, it's kind of similar to you telling yourself, I'm going to do better every single day until the point where you actually do better. But this presentation is just a little bit more cynical. Next slide, please. So our question, hypothesis, and goal. So our question is, how did these different philosophies influence how different people perceive emotions? And you guys did our survey. So our hypothesis that we came up with was these different ideas would lead to different levels of emotion, right? On the scale, we perceived Stoicism and to be the highest, while nihilism to be the least reported. And our goal was to just to test how your reactions to these everyday scenarios. And why did we use the survey? So, like we said earlier, we wanted to learn about this philosophy, but it'd be like these philosophies in and of itself are very archaic, right? So it'd be hard for us to try and apply to today's life. But through a survey, we could do this by testing how you guys would feel in according to different scenarios. So a survey is just the ideal way to get a lot of responses quickly and honest ratings from a lot of you guys. It's the simple and most effective way to compare how your emotion to these different philosophies. And how we structured the survey. So to test how each participant would react to the given philosophy, there was a scale on the bottom reported from 1 to 10, and these terms were left ambiguous on purpose. Because if you had prior knowledge to what these philosophies were, I feel like you'd pick that one the most. For example, there was in 3 of the questions, there was all one about religious, and I was the one who made the survey. So when I did the survey myself, I just picked the religious option. And the order was Stoicism, absurdism, nihilism, essentialism, and more of a religious kind. And the steps to creating the survey. So from the survey, you guys read these everyday scenarios. For example, failing an exam or having unexpected free time due to a time conflict. And after you read that survey, you guys would then report how calming you felt, if calming at all. And then we try to just compare these ratings. And now, what are these philosophies? I'll pass it on to Ella to speak about that.
Yes. So the first one is absurdism, and the core idea of this is that life has no inherent meaning, but humans still search for it, and that tension is the absurd. And joy comes from accepting the meaninglessness instead of fighting it, creating your own purpose even in an indifferent universe, living authentically without pretending life has built-in answers. And a key point here is that it's not necessarily pessimistic, but it's about freedom. And once you accept the fact that life has no present meaning, you're free to live honestly, creatively, and rebel against despair.
And take a look at the picture. This picture is from the Greek story where this man was condemned to roll a boulder up a hill every single day, and when he would get to the top of the hill, the boulder would fall. But instead of giving up, he knew that was his life. Therefore, I guess that's the intent to why he continued to do it.
And then Stoicism is that the core idea is that true happiness comes from peace and from controlling your own thoughts and actions and not from external events. And joy comes from living through wisdom or virtue and justice and letting go of anxiety about external outcomes and responding calmly and rationally to challenges. And Stoicism sees joy as more of an inner stability, as I mentioned earlier, and not as a pleasure or luck or a burst of happiness, but you get it from controlling your thoughts, not the world. And then Nihilism is the core idea that life has no inherent meaning and moral values are human constructions, and joy comes from here radical freedom. You define your own values, releasing pressure to find a correct purpose or truth, and living authentically without pretending objective meaning exists. And although this is seen as negative, which it kind of is, there is positive or happy nihilism that argues meaninglessness can actually be liberating, kind of similar to absurdism. And then existentialism, the core idea is that we are not born with predetermined essence. We create that through whom we become, through choices. And owning your freedom, you get joy from owning your freedom, making authentic choices, aligning with your values, and creating meaning instead of discovering it. And existentialism is all about agency. Your life's meaning is something you actively build and not something given to you. And so this one, in comparison to the previous ones, is more about external factors and circumstances versus like an internal meaning, I guess.
And before you continue, something like this would be the complete opposite of religion, where you think everything has a specific purpose in life. And I'll speak more about that now.
Yeah, and then we grouped all the Abrahamic religions into one, just to have a general category. And I know Brooke spoke on Christianity, which is a good intro to this, I guess. And so the core idea is that there's one God that establishes moral law and an overall plan for human life. And joy comes from obedience to divine guidance and moral principles, trusting that suffering has a meaning within God's plan, and hope is eternal, is an eternal reward for the afterlife. And the key point is that in these religions, joy is often tied to faith, spiritual discipline, and the belief that life has a divinely defined purpose, and very different from philosophies that are centered on self-created meaning.
Alright, so this is our research and findings. Josh kind of walked us through the experiment before. Situation 1, which you guys all responded to, is that you studied for a hard exam that ended up failing, which was a question that we posed because we were interested to see what the response would be. In an experiment about joy, we were wondering what people would respond to something that maybe might not be inherently evocative of joy. Surprisingly, a good deal of people did respond.
In a positive way.
Exactly. Sorry. Both those that responded in the 6th category and the 7th category fell with the Stoicism and religious beliefs because I feel like those philosophies are more driven by inner content, which we talked about before. The average level of joy was relatively low among the other philosophies. In situation 2, this one was more like intended for you guys to see joy in it. The weekend plans get canceled and you suddenly have free time. Surprisingly, absurdism was the most chosen perspective in this scenario, which is understandable though, because I feel like as a philosophy, it's very much one that's open-minded in terms of, okay, this is a new situation, new perspective I need to have. Let's make the best of it. Yeah. And then in situation 3, the weekend plans get canceled. You suddenly, that shouldn't be like that. But situation 3 is basically you get into a conflict with your friend And in response to that, a lot of people return to Stoicism and religious belief. And then the absurdist found a lot of joy in that, which was the individual that responded ate in terms of how much joy they felt in that situation. Conflict oftentimes pushes us to ground in philosophies of Stoicism and religion. Our results and reactions to the data. I feel like interpreting the data, we inferred that most people would prefer to have joy in their life. I feel like that's something we need to be conscious of before we can just, I don't know, there weren't too many nihilists in the group. And while not all people did, most people responded to negative situations via containment ideologies, like Stoicism or religion, which are more intended to capture a situation and look for the best in it, while in the questions that were more open and expanded, people felt encouraged to kind of hold towards absurdism.
And even if you go back to the results, you see in our hypothesis, we said something like nihilism would be the least reported. In all three of the scenarios, nihilism had 0%. Nobody reported feeling that because that's just a super cynical perspective on life. And in this project, people are looking for a more joyous outcome.
And then to expand on that, these are the key insights and takeaways. I feel like the data reestablished what a lot of people have been following for a lot of their life, which is that while you can subscribe to one philosophy, oftentimes you do borrow from other ideologies to build your own best approach to life. And while I wouldn't encourage elastic morality, having an eclectic or holistic perspective on life is important for emotional regulation. While it's difficult to manufacture joy, I feel like via Stoicism and religious belief, as well as partially absurdism, which we saw from the data, one can have a changed perspective when approaching a situation. Yeah.
Thank you guys.